Hey everybody, welcome to Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's Young Lions Jazz Master virtual sessions. Today's educator and guest musician is Austin Vickrey, back with us. His topic today is how to incorporate bebop into your improvisation. We've really enjoyed having Austin as part of these sessions. He has great session materials too. So if you go to check out the session topic on our education and outreach page, there's a link to session materials, and he always puts a lot of effort into those. So please check those out. We are recording these sessions for the purposes of Clearwater Jazz Holiday Education and Outreach. All of these full recorded sessions can be viewed now in the studio, which is accessible from the Clearwater Jazz's education and outreach page. If you enjoy listening rather than watching, we also have a new podcast series, which is presented by our friends at Marine Max. Most of the videos, or most of the sessions, I should say, are uploaded into the podcast, and most of the videos are uploaded into the studio. So check out these wonderful resources. They're organized by instrument in the studio, and there's just a lot of great stuff. So Austin is a saxophonist, woodwind specialist, composer, arranger, and music educator who currently resides in St. Petersburg. He was born and raised in Utah. He developed a love for music at a very young age and was awarded the Louis Armstrong Jazz Award upon graduating high school. He holds a Bachelor of Music in Saxophone Performance from the University of Utah and a Master of Music in Jazz Studies from the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. From 2004 to 2008, Austin was the assistant musical director at Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana, where he directed the Earlham College Jazz Band, assisted the Earlham Orchestra, and taught private lessons on saxophone and in jazz theory. From 2010 to 2016, Austin was an adjunct professor of music for the Music Industry and Recording Arts program at St. Petersburg College, where he taught classes in music theory, improvisation, performance techniques, and music appreciation. Currently, Austin is the adjunct woodwind instructor for Johns Hopkins Middle School in St. Petersburg, Florida. In addition to teaching, Austin keeps a busy performing schedule and plays throughout the St. Pete, Tampa Bay area with his own groups and as a sideman. If you'd like to learn more about Austin or connect with him, look for him on Facebook or visit his website, austinvickrey.com. We thank all of the sponsors that help to expand the outreach of Clearwater Jazz Holiday Education and Outreach, including the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association. We thank Blue Water Wealth Management at Steward Partners for helping to present the studio resource, and again, Marine Max for the podcast series. So Austin, it's so great to have you back with us for the Clearwater Jazz Holidays Young Lions Jazz Master virtual sessions. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Steve. I certainly appreciate you guys having me back again. And thank you to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday and Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association for sponsoring this. So really appreciate you guys. Thank you. Guys, thanks for coming today. I'm super excited for you to be here. And thanks for joining. This session is called How to Incorporate Bebop into Your Improvisation. You can kind of consider this like a starter to intermediate course. I'm not going to get super deep, but I'll get pretty heavy into some real basic jazz harmony type of vocabulary and some useful techniques for you to either you can take it to your students or for you to get bebop into your own playing. So if you see me looking here, I got my iPad that's got my PowerPoint presentation. That has been uploaded to the clearwaterjazz.com/education studio site, where you can access the PDF that I'm going to be reading from, my keynote presentation, and it's got all the stuff that I cover. So that's free. You guys can check that out. You can follow along if it's already up there, or snag it after the session is over. All right, so let's get going. So the topics I'm going to be talking about are bebop characteristics and style. We're going to talk about scales and arpeggios that you can use in the bebop style, exercises and patterns, and there's endless amounts of these. So I'm only going to start with just a few basic ones that cover some of the basic concepts of how to get that bebop type of sound in your playing. I'll go over some ideas about articulation and accenting in the bebop style. And then finally, I'll just make a quick rundown of some players and musicians that you can listen to. It's so difficult to make an accurate playing list about bebop. I mean, it's too huge to do. So I'd rather just list musicians that everybody can just go check out. And it's pretty numerous in here, and I'll just rattle them off at the end. So, all right, we're going to start with bebop characteristics and style. So bebop was developed as almost a response to the big bands. Like, it's a smaller group. Typically, the construction of that group is going to be a basic rhythm section, piano, bass, drums. Sometimes there's guitar too, as you know, we can hear from history. But usually, 1 to 2 or even 3 horn players. Later in post-bop, there was many more 3 horn bands. But typically, it's going to be trumpet or saxophone in some of the earlier bebop recordings. Characteristics of this style: we've got 2 fast tempos, but a lot of fast tempos going on. We've got rapid chord progressions or chord changes. There's a great display of instrumental virtuosity by the players. Simple to complex harmony. And when I talk about complex, we're talking about chords that have alterations to them than were expressed in earlier developments of jazz. So there's some really interesting things that happen in that respect. And chord substitutions, which I won't talk too much about today. The nits and grits. I mean, we could do a whole session on chord substitutions and a whole session on altered chords and harmony and all that stuff. But I'm just going to give you some basics of that. These are just some characteristics of the style. There's a domination of syncopated rhythms in bebop. We'll talk a little bit about that when it comes to articulation and accenting. And then I have one here that I think I forgot to put in my presentation. I can mention it at the end if I remember, but melodies over existing chord changes, or already existing chord changes, which is called contrafacts. I'll just address that real quick because I didn't have a lot of that in the presentation, but a contrafact is just a new original melody that was written over top of already chords to an already existing song. So a great example is I've Got Rhythm. Gershwin wrote I've Got Rhythm, and we call those rhythm changes, okay? But there are countless melodies or contrafacts, and in the jazz world we call them heads, but that are written over top of the I've Got Rhythm changes. One of them is by Sonny Rollins called Oleo. A lot of people play the Flintstones is another melody that uses the same chord changes to I've Got Rhythm, and there's so many others. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's get into the first topic. Scales. Oh, that was the first topic. Let's do the second topic. Scales and arpeggios. This is going to be kind of the meat of this session. So I may get a little theory heavy here. I'll try not to lose everybody. I hope it's informative. So scales and arpeggios are the building blocks for harmony and for chord progressions. We use them to create lines, melodies, licks, if you will, ideas. They're used as a way to navigate through the chords to create really interesting melodies. And that's what we're striving to do, is to create something original, expressive, fun to play, and in the case of melodies too, memorable. The best melodies are memorable, really, really memorable. So we're trying to create a story. There's so many things we're trying to do. So scales and arpeggios, if you're a student of music, whether you play jazz, classical, or anything else, rock, funk, fusion, it doesn't matter. Scales and arpeggios, and arpeggio, again, in my last session, if you caught that, it's just a fancy word for broken chord. It means to play each of the chord tones one by one. These are the building blocks to your technique. So if you want to learn how to play bebop, you really do need to have a command of your scales and your arpeggios. We're going to make use of the half-step interval and rapid arpeggiation. These are also characteristics of bebop playing. So half steps are just, and I'll be doing some demonstrating here, but a half step is just the closest that two tones can be together. So one right after another. I can play a C, and the next highest pitch up after that would be a C sharp. So that's what's called a half step. And so we're going to make use of these types of intervals. They're common in bebop style playing. And then also arpeggiation, rapid arpeggiation, usually in eighth notes or very fast eighth notes. So just a way to, an example of an arpeggio would be, I can arpeggiate a D minor chord. So that's an arpeggio, and I just played each note of the chord one after another. So in like a classic bebop line, we could make use of these arpeggios. So that's a nice line, and if we run it through, well, I didn't play it right. Remember what you play. All right. Here's another thing about scales and arpeggios before we dig into the meat of it. Because bebop is often played at a fast tempo with rapidly changing chords, it's crucial to practice your scales and arpeggios in all keys. And this is such a really daunting task. I can't tell you how many instructors and teachers say, oh, you got to play it in all 12 keys, 12 keys, 12 keys. And when you look at that, you're just like, oh my gosh, that is a lot. That's a lot to do. But it's possible and it can be done. Some keys you're going to play more, a lot more often than other keys. But that doesn't mean that you just ignore the ones that are harder. In fact, I would practice the ones that are harder even more, so that you have this flexibility to do anything in any key at the drop of a hat, because that's really what true improvisation is, being able to execute this theory and these ideas through chords just at lightning fast tempo. One of my professors from University of Cincinnati is a great trumpet player and bass player, and I think he teaches at University of Colorado Boulder now. His name is Brad Good, G-O-O-D-E, and I think I see James is watching. I know James knows who Brad Good is, and I think Dwayne also knows who Brad Good is. But if you haven't heard Brad Good, check him out. He plays bass and trumpet. He has 1 degree in bass and 1 degree in trumpet, and he's ridiculous. You might have seen his videos on Facebook. He's recording himself playing all of the instruments and putting together, he plays trumpet, he plays bass, he jumps on the drums, he jumps on the piano, and he puts it all together. I mean, he's really incredible and a wealth of knowledge. But he told me that all jazz improvisation is executing music theory at light speed. That's all it is. So the more you have a foundation for this music theory, the more tools you're going to have at your disposal, and the easier it's going to be for you to relate to the material you want to learn. Yeah, I felt like there was something more to that sentence, but I couldn't get it out. But anyway, so I'm a big theory guy, and it really clicks for me. Some people it just doesn't click. So but the other side of that coin is to listen and transcribe, and we're going to talk about that. You don't have to be a super theory nerd to be able to execute bebop. So listening and transcribing is another way for you to do that without getting too heavy into the theory. But I love the theory. That's just me. All right, here we go. Scales that you should be familiar with, that's going to make things easier for you. And this is almost kind of like a master list of scales to me. There's many scales. Gosh, probably hundreds, and different types of scales and different tunings of scales. It's just so much. But these are the ones that I have found that I'm using a lot and that I've learned to really incorporate the bebop language. We're not going to be going over every single scale. I'm going to mention them and play an example of them. But to really get the bebop, I'm just going to be talking about probably 2 or 3 scales that you can get started with right away. So the first one is the major scale, probably the first scale that anybody learns. That's an easy scale. Learn that in 12 keys. That in itself is a job, is a really good workout. Related to the major scale is the major pentatonic scale. Learning the scale is a great way to just kind of get around in one key area. It's not necessarily bebop, but there are elements of it where you can kind of use it to play in the bebop style. So that's just taking the first, second, third, fifth, and sixth note of the major scale and playing them together. So that's the major pentatonic. Minor scales. Minor scales are related to major scales in a couple different ways. I won't get too much into that, but they have a different sound. Major scales tend to sound more pleasant, or we can relate them to sounding as happy or up a lighthearted type of scale. A minor type of scale sounds a little bit more melancholy or sad. So there are a few minor scales that we can make use of in bebop playing. One is just the natural minor scale. One is also called the Dorian minor scale. This scale is built off of the second note of the major scale. It's got a slightly different sound, and this scale in particular is used a lot by bebop players, especially that sixth note. It's just really, really interesting. I don't have a track or keyboards to make it really sound like I know what I'm doing. But trust me on this. We've also got the harmonic minor scale. And all that is a natural minor scale with a leading tone right before the end. So we raise that seventh tone up a half step, and it sounds like this. This scale is used almost all the time. I can play a lick right now with it. So that is the harmonic minor scale. We can also use what's called the melodic minor scale. And that just raises both the 7th and the 6th note of the scale. It sounds a little bit different. And I like to use this one. There's 2 versions. One where it goes up and then you change the notes back when you come down. But I'm just gonna use the notes that are raised, because in a lot of jazz and bebop playing, they may not use the lowered notes coming down. Sometimes they may even keep them raised. And it makes for a really interesting sound, and it opens up a lot more fun and interesting harmonic possibilities. So here's the melodic minor scale. And I didn't lower those back down, but if I want to just kind of play around in this sound, here's what it sounds like. So it's very close to the major scale, except with just 1 note difference. That's what's interesting about this scale. All right, the real deal is the dominant scales. Dominant scales are built off of the 5th scale degree of the major scale. And there are variations of the dominant scale. First one is just straight up dominant scale, which we can also call the Mixolydian. I'm thinking about Nickelodeon. Mixolydian scale. It's a fancy word. If you're into modes, you'll know what that means, but it just means that it's built off of the 5th scale degree. And it sounds like this. Oh, that's the bebop, sorry. It's a major scale with a lowered 7th. That's all it is. We can also use the bebop scale, which is the one I tried to play first. And we're going to delve a lot into this one in this masterclass. But here's the bebop scale. What it is it's a descending Mixolydian scale where you add a half step in between the root and the 7th of the scale. So it sounds like this. You get this extra half step, and this is what really makes it, that characterizes it as bebop. Right there. Okay, that's the bebop scale. A couple of other dominant scales that are useful, and you'll run into elements of bebop playing will show, these scales will be evident there, is the 5th mode of the harmonic minor. We talked about the harmonic minor, and if you start on the 5th note of that scale, you get that this really interesting dominant scale. So here's what that sounds like. I'll just remind you, here's the harmonic minor. Now here's the 5th mode of the harmonic minor. Okay, this scale is used all the time, and it might sound familiar, like maybe like okay, if anybody's familiar with that melody, I see somebody dancing there. That's great. That is Hava Nagila, which is a Jewish celebration tune. And a lot of Jewish and klezmer music use this type of scale too. Let's see, we've got The altered dominant scale. If you're familiar with chord tones or chord changes, there's a dominant chord that's usually followed by a set. We've got, say, like C7, okay? And if you see ALT or flat 9 or sharp 9 with it, or flat 13, any combination of those types of numbers, then you probably want to use something that's called the altered scale. And this is the altered scale. It just has all of the chord tones that can be altered, and it's very interesting sound. And I'm using elements of bebop within that scale. Another one is called the dominant diminished scale, or we can also name this diminished starting with a half step. The regular diminished scale just starts with a whole step, but if we start with a half step and play a diminished scale, and that pattern's easy, it's just half whole, half whole, half whole, half whole. And we get what's called dominant diminished. And that sound is a little bit more modern than bebop in general, but bebop, there's a progression with bebop. We go from early bebop to post bop to, you know, a little bit more modern playing. So this scale starts creeping out in later things, not necessarily early stuff, but it could be referenced. And here's the thing, they didn't have these names for the scales back then. We came up with the names after these musicians were messing around with this stuff. So that's interesting to me. And that's typical with a lot of this music theory, is the names come after. They just say, hey, let's play the, you know, Charlie Parker didn't say, hey, let's play the altered dominant scale. No, that's not what they did. They were experimenting. And a lot of their experiments came from classical music of the time and classical music from back then too. It wasn't just, oh, let's recreate it. Let's experiment with what already was happening, what already had happened. And that's how innovation is done. All right, I'm getting too long-winded in these scales. Let's see if I can move forward. The half diminished scale is also one we use for a lot of minor progressions, or what we'll call minor 2/5s, and I'll talk about what that is later. But it's just the seventh mode of the major scale. So here is the half diminished scale. It's an interesting scale. And then the fully diminished scale. And this one is often called in the classical realm the octatonic scale, because it has 8 separate tones instead of just 7. I kind of messed up at the bottom there. Anyway, these are some of the basic scales that you're going to run into as you study the bebop language. The most prevalent ones are going to probably be the Mixolydian scale, which is the dominant scale, the bebop scale, the Dorian scale, and the major scale. As you get into the minor keys, you'll start using some of those other altered dominant scales, or fifth mode of harmonic minor, half diminished, diminished, those kinds of things. It's a little bit more advanced, but we won't dig too much into that today. Arpeggios. Arpeggios are just chords, broken chords. So as a melodic instrument, you want to practice arpeggiating these chords. So the chords that you want to get yourself familiar with, I'd like to get familiar with as many chords as possible. So I'll start with major, the major triad, 1, 3, 5 of the major scale, the major 6 chord, 1, 3, 5, 6, major 6/9, 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and 9 is just a fancy number for 2, which is the second because it's stacked on top. We just stack. So if it's stacked on top, we call it the ninth. We don't call it the second. The major 7th, the major 9, and then there's the major 9 sharp 11, and that's kind of a specialty type of chord, but I'm going to lump that in with the major type of chords. Minor chords that you want to try to familiarize yourself with. The minor triad, and these are just of the minor scale, 1, 3, 5. Some people like to refer to it as 1 flat 3, 5, and the flat just means that we're changing it from the major key. That's all that means. I could do a theory lesson. I don't have time. I'm just going to go through these. The minor 6/9 or the minor 6 chord, minor 7th, minor 9, minor 11th. We can have the minor 11th chord. And one of my favorite chords is the minor major 7. A little bit more advanced, but I really love this chord. It's amazing. The dominant 7th chords. Dominant 7s are just 1, 3, 5, and we call it flat 7 on top from the major scale. You can have what's called natural extensions. 9th, sharp 11, 13th. We use the sharp 11 because a regular 11th on a dominant doesn't sound good. Not particularly if you hang on it. So the more common thing to see or hear is the sharp 11. Altered extensions can be the flat 9, the sharp 9, the flat 13, sometimes known as the sharp 5. And the, I think that was it. Is that it? Yes. Well, sharp 11 too can be lumped in there, but sharp 11 is kind of one of those that can go back and forth. Or flat 5 in the altered dominant, we would say flat 5. Half diminished, that's just 1, 3, 5, 7 of that half diminished scale, or we could say minor 7 flat 5, which is just a minor triad, or a minor 7th chord with a flatted 5th, and then diminished triad and a diminished 7th chord. Now, also there's another chord in there that we can make use of, although I won't get too much. It's called the augmented triad, and it's just a major triad with a sharp 5. So augmented triad, we can have an augmented major 7. These are more modern type of chords, okay, not necessarily in bebop, or the dominant 7 sharp 5. Okay, we can have that as well. More modern sounds, but a lot of people can use them now to play bebop type of lines. All right, there's an overview of the scales and chords that you should try to get yourself familiar with. Okay, the reason I say those first is because if you know this stuff first, if you've worked through all of these in every key, and I have, and I'm probably out of practice, let's be honest, but I did these a lot when I was going to school and studying. I was tested on them. I applied them to learning songs in my jazz combos, in playing solos, and playing with my teachers and other students of jazz. The easier it is to be able to incorporate the bebop language into your playing. And you'll be able to understand what you're playing. That's the great part about it, to me, and how it all relates. All right, so how do these scales and arpeggios work in bebop, okay? It's all about the chord tones, okay? We're not talking about rhythms right now, okay? That comes later. But we're talking about lines and melodies, and we're talking about chord tones here. Okay? The nuts and bolts of what makes it sound good, all right? Playing chord tones on strong beats. This is really the basic premise of being able to play a really good, bebop line. It's being able to emphasize the strongest notes in the chord on numbered beats. That's what I mean by downbeats. So like 1, 2, 3, and 4. We also hear these half-step resolutions, especially in the bebop scale. And going from chord to chord, how do we connect the chords? What's the connecting material from one chord to another? How are you navigating that. Are you resolving to a chord tone in beat 1 from the previous measure? That's what's going to really make it sound coherent, and it's going to make it sound good. There's always exceptions to every rule. We're talking about just starting out this bebop stuff to get a command of it. I could break rules all day long, but here's the thing. How do you know if you're breaking rules if you don't know what the rules are in the first place? So you want to make sure you understand the basic principles of what's going on before you start playing all the crazy stuff like Michael Brecker and you know, Albert Eiler and all that nuts stuff, or Randy Brecker, you know, whatever. That stuff is all great. You know, all the crazy Coltrane stuff, it's all amazing. It's wonderful. It's valuable. But if you really want to learn how to play bebop, and these guys did their homework, they copied the people before them. They studied this stuff, okay? That's how the lineage works. So it's really important. I just want to emphasize it. You know, you may be excited about trying to learn, you know, some crazy Coltrane solo, you know, late Coltrane or some Joe Henderson. Joe Henderson came out of Charlie Parker, believe it or not, okay? So, you know, it's important to understand the lineage and understand the basic vocabulary first. So that's why I'm really emphasizing this. These also work in terms of bebop using syncopation of chord tones and non-chord tones. And what do I mean by syncopation? It's just emphasizing weaker beats. That's all syncopation is. Okay, putting an accent on a weaker beat. Okay, so we can talk about the bigger beats like 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 and 4 are typically the weaker beats. And in jazz, we try to put an emphasis in the swing feel on 2 and 4. A 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, don't spangalang, 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 spangalang. Okay, that's in the ride cymbal. And being able to syncopate where these chord tones or non-chord tones happen is the real key to understanding how to play the bebop language. That comes more with transcription and the articulation and accents I have to talk about later. But also, here's the last point I'm going to make before we move on. Using chord tones and arpeggios in a variety of ways. Okay, we're talking about passing tones, non-chord tones, chromaticism. That's just using those half steps. Chromatic means half step, okay, in music. Using what's called enclosures. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about enclosures. And octave displacement, meaning just taking a line and starting it higher, right in the middle of your line, like instead of going first example, octave displacement. Second example, the full line. I'll do that one more time. I'll do the full line first. I think I did it backwards. So here's the full line. Now here's the octave displacement. I took the second half of that line and I took it up. Okay, so that's another characteristic of being able to play in the bebop style, and you'll hear it everywhere, everywhere in the people that I'm going to list. Okay. All right. So how do we get going with this stuff? Okay, let's just say you've worked through your keys, you've worked through a lot of the chords, scales, arpeggios, that kind of stuff. You're ready to start implementing some of this material into your playing. So let's talk about exercises and patterns. There are countless ways to do this, guys. I mean, just there are so many different takes from so many different teachers. I encourage you to just search it out and find something that resonates with you. Okay, I can't tell you that this is the way to do it. I can just say, here's what I've done. Here's how I think it can be done. That doesn't mean that what I'm telling you is the definitive way to do it. Do your research, do your homework, you know, be diligent about what you're listening to, and do some critical listening. That's really how you're going to make this happen. Okay, so there's countless exercises and patterns. Search them out, ask your private teacher, ask a professional, go to jam sessions, you know, listen to recordings. I mean, we've got just such a wealth of knowledge out there. It's absolutely ridiculous. So do that work. Also, having a good foundational knowledge of music theory will assist you in coming up with your own ideas. And I love this part, you know, where you take something like I will take a Charlie Parker lick and add on to it or change it according to what I know about the lick or the idea, what I know about harmony, what I know about rhythm, and I'll just experiment with it. You know, so like a typical Charlie Parker lick would be something like this. That is just such a great lick. It's just a classic lick. And I played it a little bit slowly, more slowly. Here's the lick in context. He would play it very fast. Sounds something like this. But maybe I want to change that up. And over the years, I've kind of mutated that in a way to try to connect other material. So just off the top of my head, here's something, and I'll just improvise something out of that lick. I'll start with it, and then I'll change it a little bit. That back again, I can try to replicate it. I may not actually replicate every single bit of it, because part of the last half of that, I kind of just improvised some stuff using half steps, what I know of theory, closures, you know, these kinds of devices that I'm familiar with that I studied in transcription. Okay, so it's just being familiar with that harmony and those ideas. And finally, listen. I can't stress that enough. You're not going to get the context of this stuff by just playing it by rote or on paper, you know, trying to make it up as you go, or just taking what I've said or patterns and licks and that kind of stuff and just, you know, just playing those. You have to listen to the context. You know, that's how you're really going to learn it. Okay. So let's dig in just a little bit more and get a little bit more deep with some beginning things that you can start to do to incorporate bebop into your playing. The one of the first things I'm going to talk about is understanding the play through what's called the 2-5-7-1 progression. Okay, we'll call it 2-5-1 or 2-5s, 2-5 patterns. Okay, these are all phrases that we use to describe the 5-1. Okay, it's one of the most common chord progressions in jazz and in bebop. Okay, it's everywhere. This 2-5-1. I won't go into the analytics of really 2-5-1, but in terms of harmony, you could do a whole harmony on it. But in terms of actual sounds, the key of C, the 2-5-1 progression is D minor 7, G7, C major 7. Okay, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. Okay, this is the 2-5-1 progression. There are variations on this progression, but this one is most basic and good starting point. So I won't go into, maybe we can do a follow-up type of session on this where we delve a little bit deeper into this. I'll think of that idea, try to formulate that in my head if people are interested in that. All right, so ways to practice this 2-5-1. Arpeggiate the chords in eighth notes for, let's say, short 2-5s. Okay, when I say short, I mean where it's a 2-measure bit. So you've got the D minor 7 and G7 in one measure, and then you got the C major 7 in the last measure. So you had 2 beats of D minor, 2 beats of G7, and then 4 beats of C. So just straight up arpeggiating through the chords is a really good way to get these in your ear. Okay, so if I were to arpeggiate it, I would just play 1, 3, 5, 7 of every chord. That's it. I'm not trying to connect anything. It's just an exercise. So here's 1, 3, 5, 7 exercise in C. Took it down an octave for the 5 because it would take me way up into the high range. You guys can displace this however you want. Play it what's comfortable in your range, or play it both ways. I could play the high one. Let's play the high one. That took me to really, really high. But again, you know, be comfortable. I kind of used a little altissimo note at the end just because of the alto. But do this in every key. Okay, this is excellent. You just do these in every key. And it takes a while. It's a task. And you need a lot of focus and discipline. Don't try to do it all in one day. There's lots of time to get it all in. Okay, just always be working on it. Always be working on it. A little bit every day, you'll have it. Okay. Other ways that you can practice 2-5-1. What's interesting about the 2 and the 5 is that these two chords have a very special relationship with each other. Okay, and they contain similar chord tones, but they have a couple of different chord tones that create this really nice resolution with it. But what's really fun about playing bebop is you can actually treat a 2-5 as one unit. And you can play stuff that you would play over the dominant chord, which is the 5. You can play that stuff over top of the D minor. And if you do it right, it's going to sound great. You can totally do that. It's important to practice always playing chord tones on down beats, okay, or numbered beats, to really solidify these sounds over the chords, over these chords in your head. Okay, you're trying to hear the progression. You want to hear it. You don't need to rely on a piano player, even though you will in performance, but you need to really be able to hear this stuff before you play it. That's why we practice it. We get it in our heads. Okay, it's like an earworm. You ever wake up listening, like you just hear a song in your head just out of nowhere all of a sudden, and then it won't stop playing in your head all day long, and you're like, get this out of my head. Okay, this is the point where you want these. You want these in your head so much that you hear them. Ba ba do ba da ba do ba dum, ba ba do ba da ba do ba dum, ba ba da ba da ba do ba da ba do ba da ba da ba da. What a lovely singing voice, right? I'm not super accurate on pitch, but I could take it a step further and say, try to sing these lines. Because if you can sing it, you can play it. And I fully agree with that. You don't have to be an amazing singer to be able to sing and get on pitch. It helps your ear. One side note on this 2-5 progression before I start in the patterns is I'm going to reference Brad Good again. Brad Good had this crazy game that he would play with us. And he just would call it Brad Good's Magic Game or something. And he was just so like, his humor is just like flat and dry sometimes. And you just wonder if he's kidding or not. And you think, no way. There's no way. Yeah, way. He's not kidding. So what he would do is he would say, okay, here's a chord progression. You guys can play anything you want on upbeats. You have to play all 8 notes. But on every downbeat, you have to play a chord tone, period. That's the rule. You can play a 1, 3, 5, or 7. And that's it. But you can connect those with any other tone you want. Could be chromatic, could be another chord tone in the scale, could be a non-chord tone in the scale, you know, that kind of thing. And he would say, okay, here's the metronome. And we would do this without a rhythm section. He would just put the metronome on and go, okay, ready? 1, or we would have a rhythm section, they keep time, just drummer. And we would have to go da, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, and try to get those chord tones on the downbeats. This is a really good exercise if you can do it on your own, but you have to be super honest with yourself. Thing about Brad is he had perfect pitch. Well, he still has it because he's alive, but perfect pitch. So he would hear you screw up and stop you and say, okay, you're done, next person. You didn't get a second chance until you came back around, till we came back around through everybody in the class. So, I mean, he was just super hard on us. And it was, oh man, I can't tell you how many times I started and got stopped because I didn't make it. So, but this is a really good way to kind of get the feel for really getting inside these chord changes. All right. So here's some licks. I know we're coming up on an hour, but I'm going to keep going. So I hope everybody's still with me. I'll try to get through these. So here's some simple patterns over the 2-5-1 that you can play, and these are eighth notes. And for all the examples I'm going to list in my PDF, they're just in the key of C. That way it's easier. Use your skills and transpose them for your other keys, okay? So you can start from the root of the 2 chord and play this little pattern. So I've got D, F, A, C, and that's just the arpeggio, 1, 3, 5, 7, okay? And then I'm gonna come back down the scale, B, A, G, F, and then end on E, and we resolve on the 3rd of the C major. So it sounds like this. And you can actually hear the chords almost. You can hear how it resolves. You should be able to hear those even without a keyboard player, but practice it on piano. I just did a master class last week on jazz piano. Ooh, we can do the same thing on piano. Isn't that amazing? I love it. Okay, so here's in context. A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3. Nice little 2-5 lick. I can do it in other keys. Okay, so being able to play these in any key in a variety of ways. And I was just kind of maybe going up in half steps. There's lots of ways. I think I've gone over some of that in a previous one, but we can talk about that another time. This is just a lick. Here's another lick that I like to do. You can also start from the 3rd of the 2 chord. Okay, so I'm going to start on F and go F, A, C, E. We're going to go up, and then we're going to come back down the scale, D, C, B, A, G. Okay, so that's what, here's what this sounds like. Okay, we end up on the 5th of the C major chord. Okay, so that's another lick that you can use, and it's a very bebop type of line. You start getting that in lots of keys, you're on your way. Okay, some other examples. Here's one where you can start from the 5th of the chord, and this one, instead of starting by going up, we're going to descend. Okay, so, and I think I've played this a couple times in this session, but we're going to go downwards from the 5th. Okay, we're in D minor, so A, F, D, C, and then we're going to continue. We change chords to the G7, and we're going to go to B, A, G, F, E. Okay, so this is the one I used for octave displacement. Here it is again. Now, again, change of direction on the 5/7 chord. Instead of doing instead of doing octave displacement, I'm actually going to change direction. So I'm going to start by descending, and then when I get to the G7, I'm going to go up. Okay? So now we kind of create this really fun pattern that goes like this. Boom, a visual type of line, a shape, if you will. It's a shape. We think about the pitches, it's a shape. Here it is. So that's a variation on the first one. We just changed direction. That's all we did. And they're all chord tones. That's what's great. These are really great and easy to hear. They're chord tones. All right. So we can also alter some of these chord tones to account for, say, playing in a minor key or referencing a 5/7 flat 9, which is common in bebop. Okay, so here are some of these patterns that I just did. I'm going to change the A to an A flat wherever I play, the E to an E flat. Okay, this will also kind of have that sound to that harmonic minor that we were talking about earlier. So here's the lick number 1. We're ending on the 3 of the minor chord there. Here's lick number 2. Lick 3 with the descending. Lick 3 with the change of direction. Tweaked on that. Let me try one more time. Okay, so all I'm doing there is just changing one note to accommodate the harmony. That's it. That's all it is. And that's a minor 2/5, which is a half diminished minor 7 chord, followed by a dominant 7, usually with a flat 9 or some kind of altered extension. Flat 9 is really characteristic though. And then the C minor 7 after that. These are just starter patterns, okay? There's countless patterns out there. You just type in Google, you'll probably be able to find a ton of them, okay? But hopefully now you'll understand kind of where some of these are coming from and how they fit in with the chords. That's really the key here, is understanding that. Here's a few scalar type of patterns instead of arpeggiation. Okay, we just did arpeggiate or broken chord type of licks. Here is a scalar pattern that's really fun and easy to practice. And it's just going 1, 2, 3, 5 of the minor chord, 1, 2, 3, 5 of the dominant chord, and then 1, 2, 3, 5 of the major chord. So here's what that looks like. I'm going to do this in a different key so I don't get too high. Okay, I'm going to change it up. So let's see. All right, here we go. There's a couple of keys, and that's a really easy one that you can get under your, it's easy to think of. This is, granted you know your chords. Okay, that's why we talk about the theory first, because it's gonna help you. Rather than just jumping into this and go, oh, here's a lick, play this, okay, D, F, A, C, blah, blah, blah. You have no context for understanding what that lick is. But now you do, because why? It fits with the chords, chord tones, baby. It's all about the chord tones. It's all about the Pentiums. Wait, it's all about the Benjamins. I just referenced Weird Al and then whoever did the Benjamins song. I don't know. It's all about the chord tones, baby. Okay. Sorry, that was a bad attempt at relating to modern music. Ugh. All right. Here's some more scalar patterns you can do. You can do descending scales in the key from the root, third, fifth, or seventh of the 2 chord. It is just a flat out scalar type of pattern. Here it is. We got from the root. Talking about the root of the 2 chord. Okay, the 2 chord, not the 1 chord, the 2 chord. That's your frame of reference, the 2 chord. Okay, so then we got another one from the third. Let's see, da da, yeah. Scale. That's all it is. It's a scale. From the fifth. Take this down because it's get too high. From the seventh, the 2 chord. Really cool about that last one is that you end on the major 7th of the major chord, and that is a really hip and interesting sound. That's an interesting note. It's a colorful note. Okay, it's better than ending on the root, okay, or on the 5th. Thirds and 7ths are super key in playing bebop. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it is that way. Again, another lesson I could do on that. All right, let's keep going. I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. We're at an hour, I know. I've still got a few things to go over, and we'll be done. So thank you guys so much. Let's talk about the bebop scale. This is the baby right here. Bebop scale is a descending scale built from the dominant 7th scale, or the Mixolydian scale, okay? It adds a half step between the root and the 7th of the dominant scale. So if we're still in the key of C, let's talk about the G7 bebop scale, okay? The G7 bebop scale is gonna be just a G. We're gonna go down a half step to G flat, and then we're gonna go to F, and then we're gonna continue down the dominant scale, okay? So it sounds like this. Bebop scale. We can actually play the scale over the entire 2/5 unit. That's what's great about the scale, is it works. It works. All those chord tones work with the minor and the dominant together. It just works, okay? We can play the scale in its entirety, starting from the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th of the chord, okay? So I can take the scale and start on the different chord tones of the scale, and it's still gonna fit, okay? With the exception of 1, because it ends on the 7th of the dominant, and that's not gonna resolve very well with the major chord, but that's okay. Okay, if you continued the line, then it would be all right. You just can't hang on it. But here's just the example. So from the root, okay, from the 3rd, the 5th, and from the 7th. That last one, that ends on the 4th of the major 7th. So it's not super great to use in a short 2/5 unless you keep going. Here's how I can do that. So now I resolved it, okay? Just one way to do it. We can get into the bebop scale using no half steps if you start from the second, fourth, or sixth of the 5/7 chord. Okay, we're not talking about the 2, we're talking about 5. We're thinking about the 5 because this is bebop scale land, okay? It has to do with the dominant. So from the second, here's what that sounds like. No half steps here, okay? But we still have that element, we can still have that element of connecting chord tones through this dominant sound. That's just the dominant scale starting on the second. Here we go on the fourth. And from the sixth. What I really recommend with these, if you're kind of losing your ear with this, is use a backing track, you know, and put it on just a dominant 7th vamp, loop, loop, loop. iReal Pro is a great program to use for that. Just put it on a loop and practice these scales so you get the sound in your ear, okay? I realize we're running short on time. Steve, am I doing okay, or do I need to speed it up a little bit?
No, you're doing great, Austin. We don't have another session following this one.
Okay.
So at your
Okay. Cool. I appreciate everybody sticking in there. All right, so here's another variation of the bebop scale, okay? I call this 1A. I'm just labeling it. It's not a technical term, okay? That's just what I'm labeling it. But you can actually add more half steps to the bebop scale to make it sound more bebop-y. If that's even a word, I hate even saying that word. But okay, we're just adding some more half steps. So you can actually add another half step. So we're going to add 2 half steps one half step between the second and the root. And then we'll keep the original half step between the root and the 7th. Okay, so we're adding another element of that half step to this scale. So from the second, it's going to sound like this. That first one, we start with that half step, ba-ba-da, kind of like the original bebop scale. But we're putting 2 pairs of half steps next to each other, like this. Isn't that cool? How cool is that? That's so neat. Okay, you can do the same thing from the 4th. Okay, if we do it from the 4th. Isn't that cool? Okay, and then same thing here from the 6th. Again, it's going to end on the 4th of the major scale if you're doing a 2/5. So maybe if you continue through the line, then it will resolve. So here it is. There's my resolution. Bottom. Okay, but here's that straight up again. And I'm just playing with this. Okay, you don't have to use the scale straight up. Okay, just being familiar with the scale and getting these sounds in your ear is what's really going to be important. Okay, the context is going to be listening and transcribing. Okay, that's how you're going to learn how to apply this stuff. Note that when we end on, say, like a non-chord tone on that major 7, like a 4, that's not part of the chord. Okay, it doesn't sound quite right. In music, we sometimes refer to this as an appoggiatura. Okay, meaning that it's a non-chord tone that ends on a strong beat. okay? This happens in classical music a lot, where it creates a tension and then it's resolved, okay? So you can do the same thing, but that's another thing for another time, okay? Let's keep going. You can actually add one more half step in this scale if you start from the 3rd, 5th, or 7th of the dominant scale. This is really fun because we can keep the ones before. So from the root to the 2nd is a half, between the root and the 2nd, we add a half step. Between the 7th or the root and the 7th, and then we can also add one between the 3rd and the 2nd. So now we got 3 pairs of half steps we can work with. It's really gonna sound bebop-y or chromatic, okay? Here it is from the 3rd of the 5/7 chord. Three pairs of half steps from the first note there. Okay? Really hit, okay? Then we got, if we do it from the 5th. That one ends on the 4 of the major 7. If you're doing with short 2/5, got to resolve that. Here's from the 7th. That one only uses 2 pairs of half steps, but it's still viable. All right. That's a lot of material, isn't it? Okay. One more thing on the bebop. We can do a bebop major scale. Okay. And it's not talked about as enough, or as much, I guess. Shouldn't say enough, but as enough. But the bebop major scale is adding a half step between the 6th note and the 5th note. Okay. So 6, flat 6, 5. Still descending. Okay, so if we do it in C major, bebop descending, I'm putting a half step between the 6th and the 5th. It's shifting that half step between 6th and 5th instead of between root and 7th. Okay, that's all that is. We can do this again, starting from the 3rd or starting from the 5th of the scale. So here's from the 3rd. And here's from the 5th. We just did 2 octaves that way. Again, I'll go through this quickly. We can add these little half steps in between chord tones. So as long as you have a chord tone on a downbeat, these are really fun things that you can practice and get in your head. So variation 1, from the root, I can add half steps. I'm going to add it between the 3rd and the 2nd. Okay? Here's variation 1. Variation 2, the 3rd. So I did a half step between the 3rd and the 2nd, and the 2nd and the root, and the 6th and the 5th. Variation 3, we can do it from the 5th. Weird because it actually ends on the 6th note of your C major scale, but that's okay. Sometimes we can end on a 6th. It's a colorful note, right? We can take chances. Let's see if, does it sound good? That's really your criteria. Does it sound good? All right. Okay, couple other things. Enclosures, okay? Enclosures in bebop are super common. Playing notes above and then below before you reach the goal note, okay, which could be a chord tone, say on beat 1 or beat 2 or beat 3 or beat 4. Here's just a simple example. Say I'm in C major, and C is my goal note. I can do an enclosure above, below, and then come up to C. So we got D, B, C. And I know it's weird to do an enclosure on the root. We could do it on the third. There's an enclosure there on the third. We could do a variation by maybe doing a half step instead of within the scale. Half step above the goal note and then a half step below. So here's what this sounds like. Let's see. Wait a second. Nuggets of enclosures. One of my favorite things to do is to enclose each note of a major triad. Okay, so if I do it on F, I'll do on the fifth and go ba-da-da, ba-da-da, and then do it on the third and then do it on the root. So it sounds like this. Let's see. Exercise. You can practice that in all your keys. Do enclosures on every note. Wow, that's a really good exercise. You can add on to these. There's lots of ways to get this type of sound into your playing, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. So really, again, listening and transcribing within context is going to help you determine how to use these. All right, so I've got my second to last topic. Did all of those scale chord stuff craziness to spend just a little time on accents and articulations. And this really comes from transcription. The bebop articulations are characterized by the syncopation of accents. Okay, syncopation of accents. Syncopation, just accenting off beats or weak beats. At fast tempos and for fast lines, your eighth notes are typically slurred, depending on how fast you play, or very lightly articulated. Okay, we can use what's called the jazz articulation, which is a tongue slur combination where you tongue or accent up beats and you slur to the down beats. Okay, I teach a lot of my jazz students how to do the jazz articulation on their scales first. So here's an example. I'll try to make it as clear as possible, even though we're through the internet, it might not sound as clear. But if I tongue everything, it kind of sounds a little hokey. Ta, 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 ta. And this is like high school jazz disease, okay? We don't want this. We don't want to have that super heavy ta, 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 ta. We're not riding into battle, but ta, 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 okay? We want it to sound smooth, all right? So I could slur it. but there's no emphasis there. Okay, so if we add the tongue slurred jazz articulation, I have to start the sound with the tongue, but anytime I go to an upbeat, I'm going to tongue, and anytime I go to the downbeat, I'm going to slur. So it sounds like this. I'll actually vocalize it first so you kind of hear it. Ta, 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 ta. I'm using ta, ah, connecting them. Ta, ah, ta, ah, ta, ah, ta, ah. So here's that. And super slow, we hear that accent, ta, 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 but as you get faster, this amount of swing lessens. Because as you go faster in bebop, you can't go da 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 da. Again, it starts to sound like a galloping horse. We don't want that. Okay, we're smooth, we're cool, we're jazz players. So we gotta go ba-do, 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 ba-do. So here's that jazz articulation in the scale. So that's how we want to sound. We want to sound super smooth, and then we want to make sure that we're using that tonguing and that accenting. Okay. Another articulation thing for saxophonists is the muffled tongue. I'm not sure how you do it on brass. I think James, I could ask James how to do it. He's still watching. But the muffled tongue on saxophone is just partially covering the reed with your tongue and still getting a sound. But it's muffled. It has this muffle effect. Charlie Parker used this a lot, okay? And it's really key to learning this technique to sound similar to things that he was doing. So, I mean, I can take that Charlie Parker lick I did and just slur it, but I mean, that just sounds like a slurred Charlie Parker lick. If I take the accents that he did and apply the accent, okay? And I'm just doing accent. There was no muffled tongue there. If I add the muffled tongue, he would often muffle a group of notes going towards a goal note. So that first little lick, ba-da-ga-do-deep, he would go, ba-da. There's the muffled tongue where I'm saying, ba-da. That's the muffled. Muffle. The accent is created when you bring your tongue off of the reed, naturally. It just happens naturally. So that's really interesting. So you can hear some of those muffle notes. That's that muffle and then the pop after that, those accents and where he placed those, and other jazz players would place them. That's what really makes it sound super fun. And bebop, that's a big characterization of bebop. Characteristic, excuse me. Charlie Parker right there. Okay. Other players, Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane, Dexter Gordon. We're going to list all these players. With articulation and accents, syncopation and horn improvisations also come from listening how the drummer is accenting and playing hits. And I could actually clarify that and say rhythm section, okay? How are the rhythm section playing time? Where are they accenting? Those pops and those hits, the comping in the piano, the smack of the snare, the feathering in the bass drum, how the bass player is accenting 2 and 4 in chord tones, okay, and downbeats, or upbeats when he walks a bass like dum bum 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 bum, okay. So you want to listen to these players to get the idea and see how, or hear how, the horn players react to that. It takes some real critical listening over and over and over again to really notice it, because at such a fast speed, sometimes it's really subtle. But that's what gives it that bebop sound, that bebop style. An important note here, when you transcribe not only the lines and the notes and the melodies, but the articulations, the inflections meaning scooping or bending notes or falls or anything of that nature, maybe growls. That's not super characteristic of bebop, but there it is. And accents. You want to transcribe that. That's the essence. It's not just these licks and lines and notes and who's got the hippest lick. If you can't play it in context of the style, doesn't matter. It does not matter. And I pride myself in playing style first and foremost of a tune. I always want to play within the style that I'm playing. I can't go do a rock gig and play Charlie Parker licks. In fact, when I started playing in a rock gig, and my first gig, and I got a little 8-bar solo on Mustang Sally, and I played, I was just playing I was just in school learning jazz and bebop, and the leader says, if you ever play that stuff again, you're gone. I don't want to hear that Coltrane shiz, okay? I don't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear that. He's like, I want you to play the style. So to save my job, I had to go learn how to play that stuff. And it might be cheesy, it might be hokey. I had to learn how to growl, you got to learn how to do all this stuff, but it's the style. It's the style. And I got good at it. And then I was able to play in a lot of different bands. So it gets me work. So makes you a better musician. You're more versatile. So learning style. All right. There's the nuts and bolts. Let's talk about jazz musicians and bebop musicians to listen to, okay? This is a massive list, and it's probably not even complete, but I'm just going to rattle off some players. Let me see. I'm going to take my iPad out so I can kind of look while I do this. All right. So bebop musicians. I'm going to start with alto saxophone. And again, there's so many out. I'm probably leaving some out. You'll probably find some more on your own. But first and foremost, my first influence, Charlie Parker. You got to listen to the bird. I mean, if you want to learn how to play bebop, it's right there. It's all right there. Cannonball Adderley. He's more post-bop, but still has elements of bebop. Sonny Stitt. Love Sonny Stitt. And Sonny Stitt is alto and tenor. I mean, incredible. Lee Konitz, Paul Desmond, who was also one of my first influences. He's more on the cool side of jazz, so it's not as much harmonic complication as it is more line building, but real smooth connected lines. So Paul Desmond, Phil Woods, one of my favorite players, Sonny Chris, Charles McPherson, Lou Donaldson, Frank Morgan. Okay, these are just some really important alto players that you should listen to for bebop. Tenor sax players, huge list here, guys. Dexter Gordon, Don Byas, John Coltrane in his earlier years, Sonny Rollins, the giant. He's the giant, Sonny Rollins. If you want to go earlier than that, that have kind of the roots of bebop, where people are pulling from, Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. Okay, they're a little bit earlier. So Lester Young's got that nice line type of flow. Coleman Hawkins was a very vertical player. He played a lot with the chords and shapes, going up and down, traversing the chords. Really fantastic. Again, Sonny Stitt, Lucky Thompson. I love Lucky Thompson. He's kind of one that gets looked over, I think. He was in some of those Charlie Parker All-Star recordings on tenor. Stan Getz is another great one. Hank Mobley, Charlie Roos, played with Thelonious Monk. Benny Golson, Johnny Griffin. A few of these guys are later, but they have their roots in some of this bebop. Frank Foster, Gene Ammons. Barry sax. I went over this in my Barry masterclass, but I'll just name a few. Jerry Mulligan, Pepper Adams, Leo Parker, Serge Chaloff, Cecil Payne, Jerome Richardson, Bill Perkins, Sahib Shihab, okay? let's talk about trumpet players. And I just saw a master class earlier with James Suggs and Dwayne White. They mentioned a lot of these trumpet players in some of their favorite solos. And guys, I'm sure I'm going to leave some trumpet players out. Don't hate me, okay? But Clifford Brown comes to mind right away. Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis when he was early before he got into his modal stuff. Lee Morgan, Kenny Durham, Harry Sweets Edison, Howard McGee, Fats Navarro, Clark Terry, Freddie Hubbard, Nat Adderley, Cannibal Adderley's brother, John Faddis, Art Farmer, Ira Sullivan. I'm sure I'm leaving so many trumpet players out, but this is a really good starter list. Ask James or Dwayne if you want to find out some more. I'm sure they could be real more specific about, the style and the era of the trumpet players. Trombone, we can't leave trombone out. Trombone, there's some bebop trombone going on out there. And if you haven't heard bebop trombone, you gotta hear it, because holy crap. I mean, it's incredible to understand the techniques of the technicality of that horn and to get around it like these guys do. Man, it's incredible. Number one to me is J.J. Johnson. You got to listen to some J.J. Bill Watrous, more of a modern player, but still roots in the bebop. Kai Winding, Frank Rosalino, Curtis Fuller. I got to play with Curtis Fuller actually one time back in Cincinnati. He was a visiting artist. It was incredible. Slide Hampton, Conrad Herwig. I got to play with Conrad Herwig as well in the Cincinnati Contemporary Jazz Orchestra. Bob Brookmeyer, Bob Curnow, Delfeo Marsalis. Those Marsalis guys. I left out Wynton. How could I leave out Wynton, guys? Wynton Marsalis. Oh, man. You guys are going to get me for that one, I know. All right. I'll take the heat. Let's move on. Piano. Barry Harris. Okay, and Barry Harris, man, that stuff that I was talking about with the adding half steps into the bebop scale, that's some Barry Harris right there. Thelonious Monk, Oscar Peterson, George Shearing, Lenny Tristano, Tommy Flanagan, Marianne McPartland, Al Haig, Horace Silver, Hank Jones, Duke Jordan, Wynton Kelly, just goes on. Guitar, Charlie Christian, Herb Ellis, Kenny Burrell, Barney Kessel, Joe Pass, Jimmy Rainey. There's a ton more out there. Oh man, and there's ones I just started thinking of. There was more modern guy. Russell Malone is a really great guitarist. Bass, Ray Brown, Charles Mingus, Oscar Pettiford, Percy Heath, Scott LaFaro, Paul Chambers, Tommy Potter, Niels Hennig Orsted Pedersen. Okay. Drums, Kenny Clark, Max Roach, Art Blakey, Roy Haynes, Philly Joe Jones, Buddy Rich, Joe Jones, Ed Thigpen, Sid Catlett, Shelly Mann. These are just beginnings. I'm leaving so many out, guys. And these aren't like, organized by importance really. Just what comes to mind and what's prevalent out there. Guys, this is it. I think I'm finished. Let me do a summary real quick. Just a quick summary. We're just going to go real quick. So what did we talk about? I'm going to do a recap, but here's our summary. Know the bebop style and characteristics. Okay. You need to have an understanding of basic to intermediate harmony. So wow. It's been a long one, guys. Scales, chords, arpeggios, functional harmony, 2-5-7-1. That's functional harmony. Learn some digital patterns and exercises that fit the chords, i.e. playing chord tones on downbeats. Okay, and we went through those simple patterns I gave you. It's in this PDF that's free. You can download it. There's so many more out there. That's the nuts and bolts. Learn jazz articulations through listening. Okay, and we're talking about syncopation of accents, listening to the rhythm section. Okay, transcription. That gives you the context for what you're learning. Transcribe not just the notes and melodies, okay? Articulations, inflections, accents, sound. You want to transcribe some sound. Try to sound like one of these guys. See if you can make it happen, okay? And then above all, most important one, listen, listen, listen. That's it.
Oh my goodness, Austin. That was a thing of beauty. Now that was really great. Thank you for putting so much time and effort. I'm of course excited for those of us that got to participate in this today, but I'm perhaps even more excited for the countless numbers of students of music that will get to enjoy these sessions in our studio and in the podcast series. Speaking of which, there's some videos of Austin's earlier sessions that are up already in the studio, including an approach to playing lead alto saxophone and baritone sax basics. And in a couple days, we'll have up his last episode, a piano lesson from a horn player, why it's important for horn players to learn piano, and then of course this one today. So those will be up there and up in the podcast shortly. We really appreciate that. There's a lot of great stuff left this week. We have Pete Carney with us on Thursday, and I think tomorrow we have Valerie Gillespie and Steve Boyson, who will be making their first appearance with these sessions. You can go to Clearwater Jazz's education and outreach page and see all the upcoming sessions. And hopefully you can participate in that way or watch the videos at a later time. We did have one question, Austin, from earlier. You may have touched on this, but would you suggest learning scales and arpeggios first with numbers or with letters?
Wow, that's a very excellent question. Here's the thing. The letters are just labels. That's all they are. And we can get really lost in that idea that we need to know all the letters. I was just using letters because we were talking about a specific chord progression. So I thought it would be easier if I just said the letter names of this. But I think using numbers is really important. It's an important skill to have, because what makes that great is that the numbers translate to all the keys. But there's a pitfall with learning numbers. We can learn numbers, like I'm talking about, say 1, 3, 5, 7 of any chord. If you don't understand what the chord is, the quality of chord that you're talking about, then we can trip ourselves up. So what I mean by that is, a lot of people will say, okay, we'll play 1, 3, 5, 7 of the minor chord. Okay, I can do that. But what a lot of teachers will actually teach is that the minor chord is 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. If we're saying flat 3 and flat 7, the flat is a reference to that tonic major key. Okay, so if I'm saying D minor 7, 1, 3, 5, 7, we would say 1 flat 3, because in D major, you would have to flat the 3 to get that note. So really what the flats are doing is they're referencing the parallel major. So there's a pitfall in learning numbers. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to know what you're referencing. So that's why when I was using numbers, I wasn't really saying flat 3 or flat 7, because we start to get confusion in the technicality of explaining in the nomenclature. So that's kind of a pitfall in teaching this. If you're teaching just a minor chord and how it's built outside the context of harmony, then I get that, because what you learned first was typically going to be a major chord, right? So for instance, C major, C, E, G, B, that's a C major 7. C minor, so same root name, is C, E flat, G, B flat. Again, flats on the 3 and the 7. So if we're teaching it out of context of harmony, then that makes sense to teach it that way. 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. But if you're talking about harmony, this is where it can get a little convoluted. So, I mean, I think numbers are great. You just want to be careful and, double check the notes that you're learning. You know what I'm saying? If you're learning a D minor 7, I'm not thinking flat 3, flat 7. I just learned what it is because I don't have time to think about, okay, I got to use the flat 3 and I'm going to use the flat 7. But what if I use this? And what? I don't have time for that. I have to just know what it is. So if I can just say 1, 3, 5, 7 of the D minor chord, I don't have to think about changing notes. I don't have to think about, well, in D major, we're using an F sharp. So I got to flat I got to make it an F natural, and D major 7, C sharp, I got to flat the C sharp to make it. Do you see what I'm saying? It can get really confusing. So that's why I was just using regular numbers and then trying to keep it real specific to the harmony we were talking about. If there's more questions on that, I can get really pedantic about it, just because I want to be clear. And I spent years struggling, trying to understand this big secret about how to construct these chords. I didn't understand it. And when it finally clicked, I go, oh, that's why I was confused. So, I mean, that was just my experience. So when I teach it, I try to be as specific as possible and have really clear terms about what I'm trying to teach. So if there's more questions, I'm not sure, whoever asked that, you can email me or email me through my website or message me on Facebook. We can have a Facebook chat about it, or a phone call or a FaceTime or whatever. I'm happy to discuss that further in detail.
Thank you for that, Austin, and thank you for being part of the extended family of musicians and educators that are helping to create and build this wonderful resource to help others with their musical journey. We really appreciate you and you participating with us. So thank you, Austin.
Thank you, Steve. It's such a joy and a pleasure and a privilege to be able to do this. And thank you for asking me and having me on. Thank you to the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association. And thank you to Clearwater Jazz. You guys are wonderful. I really appreciate what you're doing. And I just hope I can continue to be a part of it.
All right, everybody. That's it for our session today. We hope to see you again soon. Please stay safe out there, be well, and above all, keep playing.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.